Do you want to take us, speaking of taking, do you want to take us to the Portland Trailblazers?
Yeah, Portland Trailblazers, my number is 55.8. That is the league worst effective field goal percentage allowed by the Portland Trailblazers. This team's defensive rebounding has been pretty good. They foul too frequently. They're number 21 in free throws per field goal attempt. They can't stop players from scoring, hence that league worst effective field goal percentage. They rarely force turnovers. They're number 20 in opponent turnover percentage. It's basically a continuation and in some ways an amplification of last year's defensive struggles, which wasn't supposed to happen given the slight personnel changes and the coaching changes to Chauncey Billups. This team is just a defensive disaster, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon. And I think it's worth highlighting just how bad it's been, particularly in that we cannot possibly get the right players to take contested shots department.
I think the other thing too, and this is from Christian Narshu, also he works for B-Ball Index. I've cited them a few times now on this pod. The Blazers have the most aggressive pick and roll defensive coverage in the league. The issue with that is they do not have the personnel to have that type of pick and roll coverage, which is why when Terry Stotts was there, you would predominantly see them play drop with Nurkic, and Nurkic is really suffering the brunt of that. There are 70 players who've contested at least 110 shots at the rim this season. He has one of the 5 worst marks allowed at the basket, 70.4% on the season. The only players with worse marks allowed, none of them are bigs or considered primary rim protectors. Harrison Barnes, Anthony Edwards, James Harden are the only players in front of him. Buddy Hield has statistically been a better rim protector than Jusuf Nurkic this season.
That's less than ideal, I would say, but it's also in no way surprising because this team just doesn't have a defensive identity, and whatever it tries to do, it doesn't have the personnel to do.
It's not funny, but I will say I like the acquisitions of Norman Powell, Larry Nance Jr., Robert Covington separately. I mentioned this on our last podcast, though, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. When you look back at a lot of the stuff that Neil O'Shea did, the failure to make the actual blockbuster move is what feels like it did this era of the Blazers in. Because even when they got to the conference finals, you knew they weren't going to get out of there. There was very clearly a cap on a CJ Dame backcourt being the fulcrum of everything you do. If you weren't able to get that third star at the wings or a real star big man without giving up CJ McCollum, you probably should have looked much sooner into moving CJ McCollum. It's the callous view, and the Blazers assembled a lot of good teams still, but that is going to end up being the fatal flaw of the Damian Lillard era. I think it's pretty clear.
I'm right there with you. I think the idea was always that if they were going to make a run, it was going to be because Dame went nuclear, which he has done for significant stretches in key situations. But the idea of him doing that for every single round of the playoffs was always unrealistic.